White people didn't even exist when the Neanderthals existed, but this comment does give me a great chance to info dump about some of the topics I'm really interested in, which are ancient humans, especially other species. At the end of 2024, researchers sequenced the oldest modern human genome. Now, it's not the oldest human genome ever sequenced, but it's the oldest of our species. It's just over 40,000 years old. That is just around the time frame where our species was interbreeding with the Neanderthals for the last time. This human had some of that admixture, and this is actually a representation of what they think this human would have looked like based on the DNA. Us and the Neanderthals are part of a close group of cousins. The third that I haven't talked about is the Denisovans. Denisovans were evolving from a common ancestor they had with the early Neanderthals. The Denisovans were out there in East Asia. Neanderthals were up in Europe in that area, and our species, our ancestors long ago, they were in Africa. So once they left Africa, some interbreeding happened. A weird thing, though, is that you would expect East Asian populations, I messed that up, but East Asian populations, you would expect them to have less Neanderthal DNA than the populations over here that are currently living where the Neanderthals roamed, but that's not what the genetic evidence suggested. Instead, time and time again, East Asian genomes had more Neanderthal DNA. A paper trying to figure out why that is found that it seems likely based on some of this genetic evidence, which again, ancient DNA is telling us so many things. But when you look up at Europe around 12,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherers within those populations, they have higher levels of Neanderthal admixture. But lots of those populations were replaced by later waves of farmers. And those farmers, they had less of that admixture. So more recently, that was watered down, leading East Asia to have more than West Asia. If you've seen a lot of my stuff on here, you may have heard me talk about the Arabian standstill before. It's a time period where it's like part of the out of Africa journey. However, it seems like our species stayed here for around 30,000 years or so before really expanding out. And that paper mentioned that it seems possible that some of these populations that had been hanging out here and had never left, had never made it out to interbreed with those Neanderthals, that may be where those later farmer populations were coming from, and it's why they brought that overall Neanderthal admixture down. Now let's wrap this up with the evolution of white skin. It's what I kind of started out talking about. I mentioned how it didn't exist when Neanderthals existed. Here's some of that more recent research. Researchers found that around 8,000 years ago, white skin was not super common in Europe. However, it was more common in the hunter-gatherer populations further north. And then over thousands of years, eventually some of those populations lead to farmer groups that are moving into Europe, and they're bringing those variants for that pale skin.